I'm soon to hit my double century. Look, it is sad really in a way, because it's just made a mockery of our whole justice system. Because the guys who are running the show right now, they are so petrified of elections, which are to be held in October, that they are petrified of losing. Because, in the by-elections in the last few months, out of 37 by-elections, we won 30 of them. And remember, this is despite them being supported by the umpires, by the election commission, by the establishment. And so the only way they want to now allow the elections to take place is that I should be in jail or I should be disqualified, because they do not want me in the election race. And hence these cases, and hence this crackdown on my entire party, where thousands are in jail, and either they are underground or they are in jail.
It does seem like anyone who interviews you or visits you is charged with terrorism. I guess my question is, am I a terrorist now for talking to you, like for interviewing you in this way? Like, am I allowed to come to Pakistan at some point?
Well, Jeremy, right now, if you're a journalist and you talk about me positively, you will be in trouble. 4 of our top journalists, 4 have left the country. One is on this panel right now, Mohit Pirzada. But then one of our best last year, he was slapped with sedition cases and so on, and he had to leave the country, and then he was murdered in Kenya. And I think that's one of the most tragic things that happened, because he was our best investigative journalist. Meanwhile, the other outstanding journalist in our country, who has the highest viewership on YouTube, he's disappeared for 2 months. So, no one knows. Imran Riaz, he's disappeared, and his wife and his children, what they must be going through right now. When you don't know where they are, if you know they are in prison, at least you know where they are. But when they disappear, I think people go through the worst nightmare, as his family is going through.
One of the strangest parts, I was reading all about like the crackdown on PTI. One of the weirdest parts of this is that it's actually illegal in the media for people to say their name or show your picture. Is that true?
Well, they've been threatened. The media houses and the top anchors were all called in a meeting. The meeting was very short, 4 minutes, I'm told, and they were ordered that my name was not even to be mentioned on the media.
And so people are resorting to, calling you Qasim's father or other sorts of codes for speaking about you, I believe.
It's, Jeremy, if it wasn't so tragic, it's very funny what's going on. But it is tragic because, our media, in the last 20 years especially, it really became very vibrant. In fact, went overboard at times. But, the media was able to create this sort of public awareness about political issues that never existed before. And that's the only way someone like me, an outsider, was able to win the elections. My party only grew because of the free media, the vibrant media. And so, the pillars of democracy, one is the free media, the other is independent justice system. Same thing happened with our judiciary. In 2007, this movement started called the lawyers' movement. And the whole idea was that we needed to have an independent justice system. So we were progressing towards a genuine democracy. And then comes this situation right now, where we now have, the worst type of martial law. I mean, it's an undeclared martial law right now. Basically, there is no democracy left in Pakistan.
And what makes the current, so you said we have an undeclared martial law. Pakistan has obviously been under martial law before in the past. Would you say these are comparable situations?
Well, General Musharraf's martial law, and that was from 1999 to 2008. Now, I was his opponent. I was in the opposition. I went to jail for about 7-8 days during his martial law. But I'm telling you, that was liberal compared to what is going on right now. I mean, this is, I feel as if it's like, what people must have felt in Stalin's Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. I mean, people get picked up in the middle of the night. If they're not there, their relatives get picked up. Their houses get broken. They get robbed. The businesses are shut. And this is anyone who has anything to do with PTI. I'm not even talking about the senior leadership. And it's happening to the workers. I mean, it's never happened in our country before. Totally the media is controlled. The judiciary is under extreme pressure. And I must say some of the judges, despite the pressure, are sort of giving us whatever little relief we get. But I mean, all civil liberties have gone out of the window.
Now, talk me through the events of I believe, May 9th, where you reported to the Supreme Court and you were abducted inside of the Supreme Court, correct?
Well, I was sitting within the precincts of the Islamabad High Court, and I was sitting there to get my bail or various bails, because every day I have my going to courts is like people going to the office. So every day I have to go to one court or the other when you have over 180 cases. So I was sitting there, and suddenly, I'm sitting in the registry office, and suddenly I see these commandos. Really, they weren't even rangers, they were commandos. And I thought, first of all, because my life is at risk according to the government, my life is at great risk. So the courts had asked them to give me protection. So I thought these guys had come to protect me, that there might be some terrorist hold up there. And then I discovered it was me who they were after. And so they really broke in, they beat up everyone. They beat up the lawyers, the staff there. They then dragged me out like I was some sort of a terrorist. And it was all illegal. And later declared by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, declared it unconstitutional and illegal, the way they abducted me. And of course, those images, when they went out, it had a reaction.
Right. And so 4 days later, you're released from jail because the abduction was deemed illegal. And you found out that during those 4 days, there had been protests, there had been violence. And what was your reaction?
Well, when I was asked by the Supreme Court, they told them to bring me to the Supreme Court. So from the prison, I went to Supreme Court. And the first time I discovered that there had been violence was when the Chief Justice asked me, that he said, "Do you condone this violence?" So I had no idea that there had been violence. I expected there would have been protests. But, when I was shot, and about 11 of our people had bullet wounds, one of the bystanders was killed. Even then there were protests, but there was no violence or there was no arson. So I was quite shocked when I was told by the Supreme Court, and I immediately, of course, condemned it. Because in my 27 years, I've always urged my party always to remain within the Constitution, our right for peaceful protest, but never violence. So as things unfolded, Jeremy, unfortunately later on, we discovered that these people were embedded within us. And the ones who indulged in arson were not PTI people. They were people who were specially embedded within our ranks, and they are the ones who indulged in violence. And since then, we've been calling for an independent investigation, but we're not getting it, because we can prove, if there was an independent investigation, we can prove that these guys were not part of our party, because our party had never believed in violence. But unfortunately, that was used as a pretext. We feel it was pre-planned, the whole thing. Within 48 hours, 10,000 of our followers were put in prison. This can't happen unless it's pre-planned. You can't just go and pick up 10,000 people. So all this was planned. Senior leadership was put in jail, and the rest just went underground. So it was used as a pretext to dismantle the party.
people defending them. But that I'm being told that's not what the plan is for the people charged with this. That they're actually being well, there's a push at least for them to be tried and for you to be tried in a military court.
Yes, well, right now in the Supreme Court, I have gone, other people have gone into the Supreme Court against military courts. The case is still in the Supreme Court, but the ministers of the ruling party have actually stated that if the Supreme Court gives a verdict against military courts, the government would defy it, just like they defied when the Supreme Court announced Punjab elections on the 14th of May. According to the Constitution, the government refused. So we don't know what will happen, but clearly, I mean, there's no room for military courts in a democracy.
One idea that I had, because I heard that 10,000 PTI workers were in jail and many others are underground, and then if they put you in jail, what's going to happen? Are they going to allow PTI to contest elections without you, or are they going to have to change the name? You got to start your own political party. And my idea was to have a political party called the PDKM, which is the Please Don't Kill Me Party, where anyone who leaves PTI gets to switch to that party, and then that would be their way to stay safe while they're contesting elections.
Well, Jeremy, let me tell you what's going on right now. Now it's a race against time. The tenure of this government ends on the 12th of August. Now what they're trying to do is...
1 month.
Just under a month. So what they're trying to do is that they want to have me banned and put into prison before the 11th of August or 12th of August. And so I have these cases and these judges, these special appointed judges who are now hearing my cases, really speedy trials going on. And the whole idea is that I should be out of the race before the caretaker government comes in and the election campaign starts. Now, the problem with that is that, the cases that they're going to try and have me convicted in, they are no cases. These are bogus cases. So if they go, but what they want is that they will have me convicted, and then when I go to appeal for the higher court, by the time the appeal will be heard, the elections would be over, so I would be out of the race. So this is the game plan, and also put me in prison so that I can't campaign. All I think, my view on this is that what they are trying to do is they will completely discredit our democratic system in trying to dismantle and not allow a party which has over 70% rating in Pakistan today. So the biggest political party in the country with basically almost 70% of the people behind it, if you try and make sure that it is out of the race, basically you're dismantling the democracy of the country. And that's really what they're planning to do. And all I'm hoping is that some sense will prevail somewhere along the line, because all that would do is it will destabilize the country. The country desperately needs political stability, which will then lead to economic stability. But all what they're trying to do is actually, it's going to cause more destabilization. But there's a panic amongst those who are in power that somehow, whatever happens, I should not be allowed to come back into power.
Well, one of the things I was reading that came out in the last week that made me laugh was that you were accused of being a secret Israeli agent. Is that right? And I was thinking about all of the different secret religious things. Barack Obama was accused of being a secret Muslim. Indian politicians have been accused of being secret Christians. When I first visited Pakistan, I was accused by Indians on social media of being an ISI agent, which is obviously not true now that I'm talking to you. But wouldn't it be easier for all of us just to switch countries instead of maintaining, secrecy in our countries?
Look, Jeremy, the problem is someone like me, they really find very difficult to place me. So at one end I've been called, and a whole election campaign against me was that I was part of a Jewish lobby, a Jewish conspiracy to take over Pakistan. And then a whole campaign that I was Taliban Khan. So I was, a supporter of Taliban. And then a whole campaign for last few years, I was I was pro-army, a stooge of the military, and now I'm supposed to be anti-military. So I think, people find it easy to categorize people before maligning them. So, it depends where you stand in the political spectrum. Then accordingly, then they brand you like, Jewish lobby and so on. Point is, the saddest thing is that, my God is Rabbul Alameen. He's God of all human beings, and our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a mercy for all mankind, not Muslims. So, my religion is a universal religion. It is to bring people together, human beings together. And, very narrow-minded people, unfortunately, always, non-leaders I call it, non-leaders always do their politics by hatred, through hatred, by demonizing one community to get votes. So you find, non-leaders dividing humanity to come into power, whereas you have someone like, our Prophet, peace be upon him. The first constitution of Medina was where all the various religions were brought together by him. So Christians, Jews, Sabians, they were all brought together under one millet, or sort of one community. And they all had their rights, and all the rights, they were allowed to practice their religion and so on. So it was a very advanced civilization that was set up in the state of Medina. And I find it, people like Nelson Mandela, for me, these are genuine leaders who actually brought human beings together, because people like us who saw I used to play cricket, and South Africa then was apartheid state. And I played with South African cricketers, and I always thought that, one day there would be bloodshed in South Africa. But it was a leader who actually stopped the bloodshed by forgiving the ones who put him through so much, 27 years of his time in jail, and then he comes back and forgives everyone. So these are genuine leaders who bring humanity together.
Yeah, I was speaking to some of my friends in Pakistan who are Christians, and they're also supporters of you. And one of the things they brought up was that Christians in Pakistan, I've always found this interesting, that the percentage of Christians in Pakistan is the same as the percentage of Muslims in the United States. It's about between 1% and 2%. And one of the things they were concerned about was, Christians in Pakistan being a minority, often being scapegoated by, neighbors and things like that, that they rely on the rule of law in Pakistan to protect them. And the, recent events have made them a little worried.
Well, look, Jeremy, look, what distinguishes a civilized society from a barbaric society? The Romans used to call anyone, the Romans had their laws, and everyone else were called barbarians who didn't have laws. So a human society and an animal society, the only difference is law of the jungle is might is right, and human society is only human if it has rule of law where the weak are protected from the powerful. Now, unfortunately, Pakistan has descended right now into total lawlessness. Might is right. In order to try and sideline me and my party, basically all fundamental rights have got suspended. And when that happens, basically all the weak people become vulnerable, all weak sections of the society. So rule of law is what I started my politics 27 years ago. And by the way, I was inspired by England, where I went as a teenager. And for the first time, I saw rule of law, meaning that the powerful were also under the law. Whereas I had come from what was then martial law, where you had military rule, and military rule by definition violates rule of law. So therefore I was inspired where, the Prime Minister also had to go by the rules. And, recently you saw Boris Johnson actually losing his premiership because he broke the law. So, these are alien concepts right now in Pakistan, and that's what I started 27 years ago. And my 3.5 years in power, my biggest problem was that unfortunately the army chief at the time just was patronizing these powerful people who wanted to be above law. And I wasn't strong enough because I had a weak coalition government with a small majority. And I just wasn't strong enough to implement rule of law. And by the way, unless you have, in a parliamentary democracy, unless you come in with a proper public mandate with a huge majority, I don't think it's possible to take on the powerful mafias who put themselves above law.
I'm turning this over to Safina, who has a question.
Hello, Imran Khan. As you just mentioned about the whole campaign against you basis on religious and Semitic comments, and that reminds me of Asif Khaja's interview in New York on September 27, 2017, that he actually stated that PTI in New York, PTI is a religious fringe, while he and his party are more liberal. And I have been observing, like Pakistani news, that Shiri Rahman and Asif Khaja again recently labeled you as an Israeli agent or Jews agent or son-in-law of Jews, which I can see that there is another campaign is going to be run by them. Well, I just want to ask, can Pakistan ever establish a system to register these anti-Semitic comments as a hate crimes, like with appropriate consequences? Because now and then we see them using all type of these campaign against you, which really against you or anybody else in Pakistan.
Look, Safina, look. First of all, when you have people, politicians who have no ideology, the only ideology you have is any which way to get into power. So that means that they become chameleons. So Khwaja Asif would go and tell the Americans he's liberal, whereas his party members here would be talking about, the extreme sort of spewing hatred against other sects, other religions, or they would be calling themselves backing jihad, and jihad not because they believe in jihad. Jihad is a great concept, means standing up against injustice. But they would use it sort of as a religious, as trying to categorize themselves as being religious. And so they change colors whatever audience they have. And Shari Rahman, her party claims to be very liberal, and they talk about liberalism and so on, and yet here she is making such comments and she made them in Urdu, didn't make them in English because she didn't want, the Western countries to know, what she was saying, these anti-Semite comments. Look, what I want Pakistan to be, let me just make it clear. The Pakistan I want, and the reason why Pakistan was made to be on the principles. Our founding fathers made Pakistan to be on the principles of the first state in Islam, which was in Medina. That was in every sense a modern state. It had rule of law. Number one was rule of law. Remember, just imagine at that time, forget about, even now it would be unthinkable, but at that time, a Jewish citizen wins a case against the Khalifa, which means the head of state, Hazrat Ali, one of the most revered figures in Islam, because the judge refuses to accept the testimony of his son. So all citizens, regardless of their religion, were equal. And secondly, the head of state they put themselves under the law. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, is famous saying that even if my daughter commits a crime, she will be punished. The second Khalifa, Hazrat Umar, he had his son punished for breaking the law. And so, the state was built on great principles of rule of law, everyone equal, regardless of their religion. And secondly, women were given rights. We don't realize that that was the first time women were given inheritance rights at the time. The Prophet saying that man has right over woman as a woman has right over man. So, I mean, imagine at that stage, and then of course freeing the slaves. Slavery was, first time the Prophet spoke about how you have first to treat them equal, but the best thing is to free a slave. Now these were, at that time, dynamic concepts. And unfortunately, and then of course his last sermon, where he said, we're all children of Adam. We're all equal. I mean, whatever the color of our skin. So remember, these are 100 years ago, great concepts, modern concepts. But sadly, sitting right now in Pakistan, and I'm afraid for the last 70 years, we have not even remotely come close to these principles.
Answer, this is Dr. Moeed Pizada, if you can hear me.
Ji, Moeed.
It's a privilege to be listening to you in a live space. I had the opportunity of seeing you almost every week till July, before I left, June or July or August. But I watched your interview with Tim Sebastian, and like many other interviews which you have given to Western media. And I'm mortified and surprised that someone like you is a modern man who talks of Britain, NHS, Scandinavian countries, Nelson Mandela, European history, and American history, is very easily tagged as a pro-Taliban, as a medieval, primitive mindset. What have you done wrong to send this impression? I really fail to understand. What have you done wrong?
Well, Moeed, look, good thing you're not here, otherwise you would be behind bars right now. So good that you've got away. Look, Moeed, I think in the Western press, the portrayal of Islam is, ever since that Iranian revolution of Ayatollah Khomeini, the portrayal of Islam was that they divided Muslims between two categories, fundamentalists and sort of liberals. So Muslims who looked like Westerners became moderates or liberals, and then anyone who was perceived to be religious sort of became a fundamentalist. So it was a bizarre categorization of 1.5 billion people on this earth. And this really started, I can remember after 1979, the fear in the Western countries was that the whole Muslim world would be swamped by Islamic revolution, and from their point of view, fundamentalists would take over. And so first of all, they didn't understand the dynamics of the Iranian revolution. And so it was a black and white categorization of the Muslim world. So when the Taliban came in, they never quite understood the reasons behind how the Taliban took over. They did not even understand the Afghan culture. They did not understand the difference between the urban culture in Afghanistan, especially Kabul, and they didn't understand what the rural culture was, and especially the Pashtun rural culture. And so they didn't understand when the Taliban took over what were the circumstances in Afghanistan. No one went into the depth. And so it was a black and white. Taliban were these religious fundamentalists who hated women and so on, and didn't like girls' education. And so whenever they ask me questions about Afghanistan, they do not understand that from Pakistan's point of view, our number one priority is that whichever is the government in Afghanistan, Pakistan must have peaceful relationship with them, because we have a 2,500 kilometer border with them. We have 3 million Afghan refugees, and when the previous government was in power, we had 3 different terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan and operating in Pakistan. ISIL, TTP, and then of course the Baloch terrorists. So from Pakistan point of view, we want a stable Afghanistan. Whether it was the previous government or the Taliban government, we want stability. Afghanistan has been through 40 years of conflict, and the people of Afghanistan have suffered. Now, from the West point of view, when they talk about human rights, and especially women's rights, it would be much better if the West if they allowed the current Afghan government to come into the mainstream. By isolating them, they're actually removing every leverage they have on trying to influence them on human rights and specifically women's rights. So right now it's a black and white thing, you know. If you talk about the Afghan government, because Taliban are there, you are then also supposed to be endorsing the treatment, the girls not going to school. But clearly, I mean, any human society, everyone knows that without women's education, how can a society progress? I mean, in our government, my 3.5 years, we give special stipends to parents of poor girls in conservative areas to send their girls to school. We made 60% of the new schools we made were for girls so that we could encourage girls' education. Because simple, I mean, our biggest problem right now, just to divert, is our population growth rate. Now, every research shows that if you educate the girl child, if your women are educated, automatically the fertility rate comes down. And so, I mean, it is a necessity for Pakistan. You know, for our future, we must educate our women.
Concept, it's also surprising, if I add on the woman issue, that you come from a family in which your sisters are highly educated. They work for international organizations, they're doctors, they're engineers, they're economists. Yet you, and the PTI has done the largest ever mobilization in the history of Pakistan, the political mobilization of a woman. This is for the first time that hundreds of women in Pakistan's history have been arrested and are behind bars for purely political charges. Yet your opponents very easily show you and portray you as an anti-woman character across the West, where I live right now.
I don't know, Mohit, I fail to understand that. I don't know. I think it's quite black and white because, you know, I have a very strong faith in God. I am a, practicing Muslim. And therefore I think they just stereotype people that if you're a practicing Muslim and you have faith in God, then you automatically, then all the other things follow, that you must be, in the Western eyes, you must be against women, you must be sort of very against, you must be illiberal. Although in my opinion, actually my faith makes me very liberal. Liberal in the sense that, I believe in humanity. I believe, I again repeat, my God is God of all human beings, and my Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was a mercy for mankind to bring humanity together. So, I am, and of course, I am anti-war. I mean, I do not believe conflicts, military conflicts are a way of solving problems of this earth. So, but they categorize people, and I think that's the problem.
Thank you.
I think, Imran Khan, because your opponents always are spreading news about you being anti-woman, that's actually the campaign they run in the West, especially. But I also did some search, and they acknowledged that Imran Khan's secret weapon is the resilience of women in Pakistan. I feel that despite facing humiliation, what women have shown great strength against state oppression. We have seen since 9th of May or in last 15 months. And I feel that you are the only politician who speaks honestly, recognizing the vital role women play in governance and freedom. Many of your protests are attended by families, including women. However, women like Dr. Yak, they complain about they complain about Afghanistan's women, but they fail to speak about Dr. Yasmin Rashid, who is actually 73-year-old gynecologist and a cancer survivor who studied medicine in UK. She's facing terrorism charges and is unwell in jail since 11th May. Rataj Gul, whose house was actually nearly demolished by police, is now in hiding. Malika Bukhari, who left the UK to serve Pakistan, endured 17 days in jail, humiliating conditions until she denounced herself from PTI. And I also saw the Khadija Shah, a young designer who grew up in the USA but returned to serve Pakistan, has been imprisoned since May for exercising for only her fundamental right to protest. And I also saw Shiri Mazari was re-arrested 5 times within short span of 4 or 5 days, despite even having a protective bail from court. And list goes on, like Sanam Javed, Adi Hamza, and many others are also facing similar circumstances. So the question is, why don't these institutions speak about Pakistani women, and what will you do to protect women from these draconian measures and terrorism laws when you come into power, which I'm keeping my finger crossed that you will.
Well, Safina, look, first of all, never in Pakistan's history have women been treated like the way they have been done in Pakistan, not just after the 9th of May, but last year, 25th of May, that was the first time we got a shock. The way the police attacked the women, the way they raided the houses in the middle of the night, and not caring that there were women in the house, because there's a lot of respect for women in our society. This is a big fallacy that, we treat women badly here. And I will explain where this comes from, but we respect our women. And so the idea of police barging into people's house in the middle of the night, not caring that the women in the house, breaking into bedrooms, beating up the men in front of the women, this has never happened in our country before. So that first time happened on the 25th of May. And after 9th of May, what they did to peaceful protesters, women protesting peacefully, what they did to them, the way they beat them up, there's a lot of footage on social media. And I thought they went out of the way to spread terror amongst the women. And then they jailed them. And you've named a few, but there's so many other women who you haven't named, but who have been living in terrible conditions within the jail. And the worst thing is, they have deliberately terrorized the women. So this whole movement of ours, which brought women into politics, first time you saw at such large numbers women taking part in protests, and women from all sections of the society. And suddenly when these images went out, not only women being beaten up on the streets, but then women put into jail, I mean, imagine how difficult it would be for the men folk to allow their women to go out who understand Pakistani culture. And answer to your second, and by the way, this has been deliberately done. In my opinion, the last by-election we won by a huge majority in Rajanpur. One of the main reasons was huge turnout of women in the election. And I think they are going out of the way to actually depoliticize the women. I think this is a plot, because this goes against our religion, our culture, against everything we believe in. And just answer to your last question, look, the problem is in Pakistan is not about women being treated badly. The problem in Pakistan is a lack of rule of law. Powerful women in Pakistan, compared to poor men in this country, are at a great advantage. I mean, a powerful women in Pakistan from strong families can have things done here. But a man from a weak background has no access to justice. So basically it boils down to rule of law. Rule of law, I repeat, it means bringing the powerful under the law and protecting the weak from the strong. That's what you call a rule of law. And that is really what I've been struggling for 27 years. And that is eventually what will protect the weaker section of the society, whether it is women, whether it is minorities, or whether are the poor men.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Kansa, I wanted to ask, we've been speaking about misinformation a lot during this time, and I'm not sure if you remember this. I have my own story about misinformation, and that is that I was supposed to go on a comedy tour, and I did. It was my first comedy tour of Pakistan. It was in 2017. And when I started advertising that I was coming to Pakistan, it was Nawaz Sharif supporters spread the rumor on social media that I was your secret child in the West. I don't know if you have any idea about that. But that actually ended up on ARY and Geo News, like spoken about on the news. And I had to contact the Sharif administration to explain that I was not your son. so that my visa would be able to go through. And they ended up calling the embassy in the U.S. I got my visa. I went to the airport, and then on the flight to Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif was removed from office. And so, in a way, Nawaz Sharif's last act of corruption was getting me my visa to go to Pakistan.
Jeremy, look, the problem is when you have people desperate to cling to power, because power for them means two things. Power for them means making money and stashing it abroad because they can't afford to keep the money in the country. Because when you make billions, if you keep it in the country, it gets discovered, so you have to send it abroad. So you do twice as much damage to the country when you launder the money out of the country. And Nawaz Sharif and these two families, this is what they've been doing for 30 years. And by the way, they blame each other for money laundering too. So it's not just us calling them. And secondly, the next problem is how to protect that corruption money. So that becomes the second thing. That's how they damage the country even more. Now they want to protect the money. So protecting the money means they must stay in power, because only in power can they protect the money. So this whole exercise of them conspiring with the ex-army chief to topple my government, I mean, their main interest was how would they get immunity from corruption cases. And that's exactly what they did the moment they came into power. First thing they did was they passed a legislation in Parliament. And it is incredible that such a legislation could be passed, where by law they managed to get rid of, they got immunity from the corruption cases of at least $5 billion, 1,100 billion rupees. So they passed this law and they were able to get away from these corruption cases. By the way, these corruption cases were made against them when they were in power, not during my time. So this is the problem. And by the way, Jeremy, this is the problem the entire developing world faces. Today, countries are poor not because of lack of resources. They are poor because they don't have rule of law. And a symptoms of not having rule of law is corruption, and corruption of the powerful. And that's what destroys a country, because, according to the United Nations Secretary General's panel, which is called the FACT-I panel, made up of economists who researched over a year to find out why were the poor countries getting poorer and rich getting richer. And the main finding is that every year, now listen to this, $1.7 trillion, $1,700 billion every year leave the developing world into offshore tax havens or into Western capitals. So $1.7 trillion moves from the poor countries to the rich countries and offshore accounts from the corrupt ruling elites. So this is how countries are getting poorer, because they are being robbed by their own elites. It's like if people might not know this, might not have read it in history, the greatest transfer of wealth took place when the East India Company conquered India. And from 1757 onwards, when they conquered India in 1757, India had 23% of the world GDP. And from then onwards, for 150 years, they transferred the wealth of India, was creamed off and taken off to Britain. And Britain had 3 or 4% of the world GDP when they conquered India. When they left India, Britain had 22 or 23% of world GDP, and India was left with 3 to 4% of the world GDP. So, they robbed the country. It's exactly what the ruling elites of the developing world are doing right now. They are siphoning off the money, and they end up and unfortunately, the powerful countries, rich countries, don't do anything to stop this plunder.
You're speaking about the rule of law in Pakistan. Of course, the West prides itself on our rule of law. But I was thinking about how the idea of rule of law predates the West. You find it in Roman law and Christianity and Islam, that it's not some idea that's sort of foreign to Islamic countries. It's actually something that is at the source of that.
Look, Jeremy, in the Islamic tradition, there were over 140,000 messengers of God sent to mankind over thousands of years. And every messenger of God, the common message was justice. One of our great scholars, Ibn Khaldun, he was considered the father of modern history. According to him, he said that my whole study of Islam brings me to just one point, that the whole purpose of the Almighty sending man to earth is to establish justice. So whenever during human history, the societies that had a better justice system always prospered. So it is connected to prosperity. So justice brings you rights. Rights gives you freedom, and free and stable societies then become prosperous. So hence, if you look at the table of rule of law index, out of the 140 countries, the top 15 countries which have the best rule of law are the most prosperous. And the bottom 15 countries which do not have rule of law are the poorest. So it is directly connected to prosperity.
Hansa, can I jump in for short questions? Because then I have to leave because I'm going on a house search and I'm got an appointment. Hansa, I am surprised also that the way the media has been treated, the way Shahid Arshad Sharif has been murdered. Imran Riaz Khan is missing now for 65 days. Look at Sabir Shakar, myself, Shaheen Sabai, Wajahat Saeed, we all have been registered FIRs for terrorism. Yet the impression of the Western media is, and I think also Jeremy should comment on it, is somehow the other that you were also as harsh to media. Not a single journalist was arrested in your time. There were no FIRs against the journalists. The journalists were not abducted and detained under your government. Neither are you able to explain that situation, nor is anyone understanding the word. There is a sea difference. Look at myself, look at Sabir Shakar, look at Shaheen Sabai, look at Wajahat Saeed, look at the poor Arshad Sharif, look at his family, look at Imran Riaz. Yet they're blaming you for cracking down on media. I mean, how do you explain that?
Well, I think, Mohit, there's a term called moral equivalence, where they equate two unequal situations and actually protect the real aggressor. So, this idea that, some journalists might have suffered during our time, 3.5 years, and because of that, then the whole crackdown, I mean, what crackdown? Media is totally muzzled today. I mean, the media is totally controlled. There is no freedom. Under General Musharraf, and I don't know whether you remember, General Musharraf, the media was liberal compared to what is going on right now. So
100%.
It is completely controlled today. I mean, not just that the four of you have left the country, not just that Arshad Sharif was murdered after having to, because of threats to his life after leaving. I mean, what about the 4 or 5 senior journalists who were roughed up and beaten up in Pakistan? I mean, senior journalists like Ayaz Amir, like Sami Ibrahim, like Ghulam Hussain. I mean, these guys were just roughed up within Pakistan and threatened. So, I mean, this is unprecedented what is going on, the sort of crackdown. And yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes they bring out some sort of human rights watch or some report or some international journalism who might have mentioned few journalists got a raw deal. But by the way, I looked at all there were 10 cases. So I actually had it investigated. There are 10 cases. And all of them, there were 3 of them which has to do with security, where the military establishment directly spoke to the media owners in 3 or 4 cases. There were one case which we were unfairly blamed because the channel, this one guy, his viewership dropped. And there was only one case that came to me, and that was about Matiullah Jan, And when I found out that he had been picked up, the next day we had him released. But you cannot compare what is going on. I mean, there is just no comparison between then and now.
I would like to add actually, thank you for asking Dr. May, that since last 15 months, there are more than 40 cases, 40 individual cases registered against journalists. There are 40 members of journalists from Karachi, from Punjab, from Lahore, from Peshawar, and from Balochistan. And if you calculate only Balochistan, there are more. But I have a question, as Dr. May said about media, that the rape incident actually happened. If you remember, Dr. May, the rape incident on the motorway during Imran Khan's news sparked international outrage. But the Human Rights Commission in Pakistan took quite active measures to seek justice on the times. But when I look at now, in early February this year, a woman was assaulted in F9 Park, Islamabad. Media discussions on that matter were completely banned by camera, and our human rights bodies appeared to remain silent, like there was no peep. Just recently, yesterday, there was a news about another rape occurred in Mark Mahib's in Islamabad, and that actually raises concern about the potential compromises like our human rights institutions in Pakistan and media have made. Is there really are the human rights organizations and the media in Pakistan is completely compromised? Because what I heard, okay, Imran Khan's name or PTI leadership cannot be mentioned in TV, but other than that, can all these crimes is also banned? And why actually human rights organizations are silent? Why there is no beat against those things?
Well, look, Safina, look, unfortunately, the media, and I'm talking about our own media, and then I'm talking about the Western countries, two different things. Our own media is unfortunately controlled by the media owners, the bosses. And the media bosses have huge business interests. I mean, they're interested not just running a media house, they have other business interests. And so for those other business interests, which actually is what brings them most of their money, they are willing to compromise on the freedom of media if those business interests are threatened. We never did that. In our time, the media, if you look at the media, majority of the coverage was against PTI, my government. I mean, we had a real problem with the media. In fact, the problem was that there was real libelous stuff on the media. And even I, as a Prime Minister, I had to go to court. And yet, in my 3 years, I never got justice. Whereas in Britain, I've been in a libel case, a very famous one, and within 1.5 years, the case was decided. So anyway, I couldn't get justice, and we felt there was a lot of reporting, a lot of fake news, and we tried to bring legislation to control fake news, by the way, which is a problem all over the world because social media is a new phenomenon. But unfortunately, I found that the media then and the human rights organizations, were very vocal at the time. But now, with a complete clamp down on human rights, I'm afraid there's not much, hardly any response from them. But about the Western countries, I find that, they talk about human rights when it suits their interests. But right now, I mean, all the talk about democracy, human rights, and so on, it's only reserved for, China and Russia, when something happens in Hong Kong or Uyghurs or something to do with the Russian dissidents. But what is happening right now, there's hardly any condemnation from any of the powerful Western countries who claim, that they are the, their professed aims are promoting democracy and human rights.
Yeah, that actually surprises me a lot. Thank you, Imran Khan.
Chairman, this is Atif. First of all, thank you very much for accepting my request and joining us at Twitter Space today. I'm really grateful to Jeremy and Safina for organizing this event, as well as our social media team headed by Gibran Ilyas, Imran Hamid, because without our social media, all this our political movement, our struggle, all these events couldn't have been possible. And then, a friend like Dr. Mohit Pirzada, a mentor, who has always been our biggest support, especially during the last 13 months. I don't have any question, it's just I want to bring it to your notice. Alhamdulillah, we have support among 98% of Pakistani Americans. And along with that, we have started getting huge support among the Muslim Americans as well. And on September 2nd, we are planning one of the biggest events on which you will be speaking to among over 15,000 Muslim American gathering. And also, I want to make a commitment, like you always say, La ilaha illallah. And inshallah, we will fight till the very end. We will not leave you alone. All the overseas Pakistanis are with you. And after that, Gibran Ilyas, I think he's also at the airport and he's about to check in. He also wants to make an announcement. Gibran bhai, if you can unmute yourself and make that announcement, because it's a very important announcement. Thank you.
Sure. Many thanks, Adil. Concept, you had said that it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. So what we have done in social media is, we've heard of citizens journalism, but what we have done is this is going to be the first ever citizens documentary. I think it's going to be one of the biggest. So what we're asking people who have footages in high definition from March 2022, when the whole movement started for Hakiki Azadi, just check my pinned tweet. feedback@insaf.pk is the email address to email if you want to be part of that project. Inshallah, it will be one of the greatest documentaries ever, because everybody will be part of it. Kansab, my short question is, you once mentioned that PMLN, they're not educated, nor they try to get education. So just recently, Khwaja Asif has blamed, put allegations on Shaukat Khanum Hospital again. I say we let them, because every time he does that, we get record donations. So this is what we're seeing this time around. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, look, Gibran, these people are discredited. They have been in power for 30 years. Everyone knows everything about them. And the last 14 months, they have completely destroyed themselves, because they came in on the pretext that they were experienced in dealing with the economy. And they have completely, our economy has never been in a worse shape than it is right now. And this is, despite what was called the commodity super cycle, when post-COVID, the international commodity prices had gone through the roof, which is when we were in power. And now they are down by 35%. And despite that, you find that inflation is unprecedented in Pakistan's history. So number one was inflation, number two was fixing the economy. The economy has nosedived in Pakistan. We almost defaulted on our loans, and that would have really set the country back. So people now, the reason why they are scared of holding elections, and the reason why they only want elections, is when they know that PTI is completely hamstrung by the establishment, and I'm in jail or disqualified, because they are petrified that in the elections they'll be wiped out. My point is that whatever happens, they'll be wiped out in election. Even if I'm in jail or if I'm disqualified, I don't think the moment the elections start, they do not understand the passion on the ground right now. The feeling of injustice amongst the people, what is happening, whether it is economic injustice and whether it is mishandling of the economy or the governance system and the levels of corruption. So they will be wiped out whenever there are elections. But the point is that people like Khwaja Asif, no one listens to him, because these people are supporting, they have supported the most corrupt governments. I mean, the two Asif Zardari was considered the most corrupt man by people like Khwaja Asif and Nawaz Sharif. Now they're all together. And Zardari used to call Nawaz Sharif the most corrupt person. So they're all together now. So anyway, they have no credibility. And that's reflected in them trying to run away from the elections.
This is Jeremy again. I there seems to be an effort by the media to portray you as, somehow anti-American. I know that one of your generals paid $30,000 to lobby the U.S. to support your removal as prime minister. Would you be willing to map that amount if I convinced the CIA to put you back into power?
Well, Jeremy, yes, amazingly, my own army chief at the time had hired this lobbyist without us knowing, and my own government was paying him $30,000 while he was lobbying against me to the Americans and telling them that I was anti-American. But I just a word about what is this idea about anti-American. I mean, how can you be anti-whole country? This idea of calling someone anti-American or anti-Pakistani or anti-Indian, for instance. How could I be anti-Indian? I would be anti the policies of Narendra Modi, specifically the way they are treating the minorities or the people of Kashmir. But I can't be anti a whole country because a country is made up of all sorts of opinions. So I was always against the policy of Pakistan joining the US war on terror, because as a Pakistani I felt it would be a disaster for Pakistan, and it was. 80,000 Pakistanis were killed in it. Over $100 billion lost to a poor economy. And I was always skeptical about the US war in Afghanistan or US invasion of Afghanistan, because there were no clear aims, and I kept saying there would never be a military solution. So if you criticize the US foreign policy, does not make you anti-American. I mean, if I'm today criticizing my own government for this fascist tendencies, I mean the draconian laws, the total violation of our fundamental rights, does that make me anti-Pakistani? So this is, it's to brand people. Sometimes I feel that, to stop criticism of certain policy, and especially when you're from other countries, it's easy to brand you as being anti-American and then shut your voice.
Well, I would like to add in there, Khan, that you have stayed in UK since you were 17 years old, and you always say that you loved being here and the rule of law. That's how actually you got inspired by. So I would like you to add into this that why would you be anti-West when actually you have been praising them and you have stayed there for nearly 20 years?
Look, how can you be anti-West? West is a geography. I mean, it has so many countries. These are so bizarre, these terms. He's anti-West or he's anti-American and so on. I mean, Britain, I keep telling everyone that the first time I saw two important things which made the basis of my manifesto was rule of law and a welfare state. So that's the first time I saw in Britain. And later on, when I studied my own history and especially Islamic history, I discovered that the state of Medina was based on these two great concepts of humanity, justice and humanity, and a welfare state, and all the great concepts which I saw in England were actually 1500 years ago was actually in the state of Medina, set up by our Prophet, peace be upon him. So, but I also understand the weaknesses of the Western society. I also know their strengths, same as I know the weakness of my society and the strength of my society. But that's how people, understand different communities. You don't sort of blanketly say you are anti one community or anti the other community. You just deal with them in mature ways to their weaknesses and their strengths.
Thank you.
As I was getting ready to, coming up with a list of questions that I was going to ask you, my neighbor bought a black pickup truck, and so it's sitting outside. I don't know if I should be worried or not that anyone is coming for me with a black ego or anything. But
Jeremy, you should be very worried, because if they come in, let me tell you what they'll do. First of all, if they find you, they're going to thrash you. And if they don't find you, they will pick up anyone who's in your house. They will take them, with them in the black Vigo. they will smash your house, they will rob it. I mean, this guy, I mean, one of my MPs, he was not in the house. They broke open a safe and they, took away everything from the safe. So it's not just that they beat you up and they rob you, they break the house. In other words, they vandalize the house. They also rob it. So be careful.
Right. If I do need to flee, from what I understand, I can hide in Octobot, because they never look there, from what I understand.
Well, my senior leadership, they will give you plenty of hints because they've been hiding for 2 months. They're all out of their homes. They're hiding.
Gotcha. I think Safina mentioned Pakistani Americans. Now, I have a pretty big fan base of Pakistani Americans, and in terms of the population of Pakistanis in the United States and the effect that they have in the United States, it's very outsized. We call it like punching above your weight. They're one of the most respected and influential groups. Meanwhile, I read that in the last year, 750,000 Pakistanis have left Pakistan, which is great news for us because we love Pakistanis here. They are our doctors and we're very involved in politics and industry. But I can't imagine this kind of brain drain being good for Pakistan.
Look, Jeremy, first, the Pakistani American community is one of the most powerful Pakistani expatriate community. And also it is one of my biggest support, PTI's biggest support does come from not just the Pakistani Americans, but basically amongst the 10 million Pakistanis that live abroad. And the main reason is because when they go abroad, like I went when I was a teenager, you see rule of law. And by rule of law, it means that if you pay your taxes and if you don't break the law, you are a free man. You're protected by the laws of the land. And whereas when they come, when you see what is happening in Pakistan, I mean, it would never happen that in the US, your house would be broken in by police in the middle of the night and people picked up, beaten up, the house robbed. It's unthinkable there. Because no police officer would dare to give instructions like that because his juniors won't obey them. Because it would be against the law of the department, the police department. They're not allowed to do this sort of thing. So the juniors would not accept this. And even if they did accept this order, they would be liable to be sued in a court of law and would suffer heavy damages. But here, unfortunately, might is right. And this is what takes away the freedom of human beings. And it actually creates a society where it completely shuts off the potential of a society. It destroys meritocracy. So it destroys this, only the potential of humans is in freedom. So throughout history of mankind, a human strives for freedom because only free societies, can ascend, can go to great heights. And freedom comes with the rule of law. Now, that's why the overseas Pakistanis back us, because they live in societies and understand what I mean by rule of law. Now, second, what the point is, actually, it's a very serious issue we are facing right now. People are losing hope in Pakistan. And why are they losing hope? Because the establishment is trying to impose on us these crooks and criminals who've been in power for 30 years, who are proven money launderers, who are proven to be corrupt, not just by what we say, but what they say about each other, what the establishment used to say about them. So when these people are imposed on a country, and then you see that the establishment is trying to not allow the biggest party to come into power, which means over 70% of people, the choice of over 70% of the people will not be allowed to compete in the elections. That's when they lose hope, because they look at these faces who they've been seeing for 30 years and they think they will be back again in power. That's why we have 1.2 million top professionals leaving the country in the last few months. This is the biggest brain drain in our history. And remember, not just that their skills are leaving our country, but also their capital. They will be taking the money out as well. It's the big disaster which is taking place in this country. And unfortunately, right now, the way the establishment is sitting with this government of crooks, this is the biggest, from my point of view, I mean, the cause of hopelessness. And it's because of hopelessness that you find people leaving the country.
So my question is about the status or the role of the Army in all of this. People ask you lots of questions about the Army, and from what I understand, the Army is the most competent institution in Pakistan. So anything that needs to get done, whether it's COVID policy, which you were praised for, relies heavily on them. That's just how everything works. But a healthy country needs other institutions other than the Army to be strong, to be intact, to be able to carry out the functions of a society. So how does a country transition to having stronger institutions other than the Army? I mean, are there any other countries that have done this? What's your plan for this?
Well, look, Jeremy, we started off as a security state because in 1947 we got our independence, and the next year we had a conflict with India. Now from then onwards there was this fear in Pakistan that we have a neighbor 7 times the size of our country, and will we survive? So the dependence on the army grew, and over a period of time, not just dependence, but people sort of loved the army because you love an institution which will guarantee you your freedom and your protection. But subsequently the country had to evolve. You have to evolve as a country to have a proper democratic system. A proper democracy means genuine freedom, and that evolution process kept hitting snags because we would have military dictatorship, then we would have a democratic setup come in, and within a decade it would be wound out and the military would come back in again. So this happened 3 times. Now when it happened 3 times, the evolution of the democracy stalled. So while we would have been evolving as a democracy, unfortunately it stalled. Now in the last, how many years should I say, 15 years, our democracy was sort of moving forward. There was no interruption in our democratic process. And we were sort of struggling along on our way, and the democratic systems were getting stronger. And then comes this intervention by the army chief in April last year. Now, a government that had the best economic performance, and this is in the economic survey of Pakistan, you can see that all the economic indicators were positive. We were heading in the right direction, and suddenly he decides to pull the rug under the feet and brings back the same people. And so that's when, in the last 14 months, the country has just gone down the drain. All the worst economic indicators, but even worse, the hopelessness, seeing the same faces again, and seeing the establishment standing with them, and then trying to block the way of the biggest party in the country so that these crooks could again win the elections. That is what is causing hopelessness. And secondly, that means completely dismantling the democratic structure that had been evolving over a period of time. So we are right now back to square one. And this is why the coming elections, could be vital for our country's future. In my opinion, no matter whatever the establishment wants, I think that people will come out in such great numbers and they will vote against these criminals. And I think we will have a huge change. But other people are watching the grip of the establishment right now, and then the draconian measures right now. People are just losing hope, and they feel that there's no hope, and they're leaving the country.
Okay, Mr. Khan, that actually reminds me what happened in GB. As we are aware, none of the prime ministers in Pakistan has ever served a full 5 years term in last 75 years, despite having their party's majority of the seats. And also, we know that PTI government was overturned in both GB and Kashmir. And on the election day, July 7th, the GB parliament was sealed by the police, and even the assembly speaker was not allowed the entry. So considering all these hurdles, how we can expect that upcoming elections to be free and fair? If the PTI wins a majority of the seats, what does the future hold, given what has happened in GB recently, which you are aware? It is also worth looking at elections announced by the Supreme Court on May 4th were not held in both provinces. So what actually, given these challenges and previous incidents, how we can ensure free and fair elections if PTI wins the majority of the seat? What does the future hold based on what happened in GB, like for us, that you were overturned for after 3.5 years? So even if given these challenges, how will we make sure that free and fair elections will happen, and what will be the future of our democracy?
So, Jeremy, can I have just one question after this? Can you make this the last question? So I'll just answer this and then one question after this. Look, Safina, look. What happened in Gilgit-Baltistan and what happened in Azad Kashmir is a disaster for our democracy. Because what you saw was the manipulation by the establishment of pulling down a government. Now, if this keeps happening, the democratic process can never evolve. So you are always, beholden to a powerful establishment, which then decides to make or break governments. And the damage done to Pakistan, and I'm not talking about PTI, the damage done to Pakistan by what General Bajwa did by removing a running economy, a government that had gone out, had dealt with COVID, one of the best top 3 countries in the world, which dealt with the biggest crisis humanity faced for almost a century, and then brought the economic performance, 6% growth rate average last 2 years, to bring down that government and replace it with these cabal of crooks, and then they crash the economy and destroy the governance system. So who is going to pay for this? Who should be responsible for this? Will anyone ever be held responsible for doing this such tremendous damage to the country? I mean, the amount of damage done to the common people going below the poverty line, half our industry closed today, growth rate from 6% coming down to 0.3%, which has consequences. When industry shuts down, it takes quite a while to again open up your industry or restart it. So this is what happens when someone makes decisions in a closed room without any debate and then not accountable to anyone, and he can then trot off anywhere while the country just goes down the drain. So, and I'm afraid in Gilgit-Baltistan, the tragedy is that Khalid Khurshid was one of the best chief ministers I've seen in Pakistan. He was outstanding, and to actually bring him down and his government, such a great disaster was done to people of Gilgit-Baltistan. I think it is sad what happened. I think it is not just bad for democracy, but for the people of the entire Gilgit-Baltistan province. So to conclude, let me just say, look, our democracy has to move forward. We have no choice but to have democracy. A bad democracy is better than a military dictatorship. This is a consensus amongst the people of Pakistan. So where do we go from here? The question you're asking is that what happens if there are no free and fair elections? Right now, no one thinks there are going to be free and fair elections because they're already planning to rig the elections. But my opinion, I'm an optimist. I feel that in this election, the level of public awareness in Pakistan is so much that I feel that you will have the greatest ever turnout in these elections. And no matter how hard they try to rig it, I'm a strong believer that the people in this country will defeat all methods of rigging which are being planned.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Imran Khan. I have one very, very fast question from my followers who all want to know that on the subject of biryani, do you like aloo or no aloo?
Well, as you get older, your tastes change. So biryani was a great delicacy of mine some 40 years ago. But right now, I'm afraid there are other delicacies that I enjoy most. But then, yes, biryani with aloo I like more.
With aloo, okay, thank you. And also, how do you, just day to day, how do you maintain, this is the last question, how do you maintain a sense of peace and hope during this time?
Well, Jeremy, I have a very strong faith in God, which always keeps you going, because, you try your best, and since I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing this for my country. Why am I doing this for my country? Because I'm one of those privileged people who got so much love and respect from his country that it was important for me to try and do my best for them. And so I've tried to do my best for my people. And the rest I leave to the Almighty. Because, it's success and failure are in His hands. Effort, struggle is in my hand. And I will be struggling to my last breath. But then how do I relax and stay calm and content at night? Because after doing my best, then I pray to the Almighty that, look, now it's up to you. You are the one who's going to decide whether I succeed or fail. So actually, that's how I go through all the tough times. And I have to say that these 12 months, and particularly the last 2 months, have been probably the toughest 2 months of my life.
Well, Khan Saab, thank you so much for joining us.